Are we back?
Yes, not sure what happened there, but all right, hopefully we get everybody back in.
I'm back.
All
I'm
right.
back too. Let's see. Am I Anna or am I Debra? I'm still Debra.
Yeah,
Am I Debra? You're me again, huh?
Yeah. What is this?
I'm not quite sure.
trying to think. Zoom
Was
is.
that just me or was that everybody?
We all
Oh,
went off, didn't
We
we?
all,
Might have been everybody.
It said that the host had closed, she hit the leave the mitten thing for y'all, ended the meeting for us.
Oh,
She's such
Oh,
a
that was
kidder.
better.
yeah.
oh,
Do you want me
Virginia.
to host it? Do I need to host and moderate?
Yeah, I'm not sure where she went here.
Is she back in the audience perhaps?
I don't see her. She did text me, but I told her to restart.
I can co-host if you want me to
So can I.
and keep time since I did it yesterday.
Yeah, we'll make you a co-host, Anna, just so hopefully that won't happen again.
So
I
nobody
thought
gets
that was me.
No. Hart Taylor sending us messages. He thinks we all look good.
We're
He's got some
feeling
kind
good,
of filter
too.
on his screen when it comes to looking at me.
Can someone tell me what happened?
We all got kicked out, Marty.
We all went to coffee, Marty.
Oh, we all got kicked out. I thought it was me.
We
Yeah,
thought,
no, it was everybody. Yeah,
no,
so
we think she hit the leave end thing. Well, I
And
think.
so it's okay if I enter just through the regular way, not the other link that Christopher sent? Because here I am.
oh yeah, you made it to the panel. That's the important thing,
That's
right?
the
We are.
thing. Okay, good, good. All right, thank you.
I couldn't even get in through the link.
Somebody who's, oh, Josh, you're showing as me.
Again?
You're me too. Hey, I love this. I have multiple personalities. Thank you.
Boy, Deborah.
Somebody else got kicked out too.
Oh yeah, are we missing anybody?
No, we got the panel here.
Got the panel, right? Okay, great.
Check it now, Deborah. Is this okay?
Yeah, ready to start?
That's good, Josh.
I'm watching some of the, oh, Josh, I like you. Okay, if I start, Christopher, or do I need to wait for you?
Yes, I'm gonna hide myself and then I'm gonna see if I can find Virginia, but I'll stay.
Yeah, but let me just say I can do the let you know when there's 40 minutes in, 45, if you want me to be the timekeeper of that.
And if you do that, I'll keep an eye on the chats. How's that?
Okie dokie.
That would be
We
great.
got it.
You guys
Okay,
are awesome. Okay.
the audience is in. Hi, everybody. I'm Judge Debra H. Goldstein, the author of Kensington's Sarah Blair Cozy Mysteries. And even though my books fit a little bit of the genre of the Golden Mystery Age, which began writers writing them back as far back as 1911, but predominantly in the 1920s and 30s, I'm not going to be talking about me today. I'm going to be talking about the Golden Age of Mysteries with a wonderful panel. But let me give you a quick background. Golden Age of Mysteries has certain conventions. I'm going to take this down so I can see it. They were established, basically it was that there'd be no surprises on the part of the reader in the details of the plot, and primarily to the identity of the murder. The majority of that novels in that era were whodunits, but we're going to be talking about a lot of this as we proceed. A lot of the writers that we did this, though, were often thought of as British in the sense Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, Conrad Doyle, Josephine Tey, but there were also Americans. Earl Stanley Gardner, Ellery Queen also wrote in that genre. In the next few moments, so we'll talk more about it, but there was even a detection club. A lot of the writers of this era joined together so that they could write and they could police each other, you might say. It was by invitation only. The present president, I won't be going through all of them, is Martin Edwards. And I mention this because he's written the top book in it, The Golden Age of Murder. So now let me introduce you to our elite panel. Today we have John Billheimer, who has not been listed as Debra Goldstein today. He really is John Billheimer, a native West Virginian who lives in Portobello, California. He holds an engineering PhD from Stanford and is the author of the funny, sometimes touching, Owen Allison mystery set in the Appalachian coalfields. He has a second series out, and he'll be talking about some of his books too. But I think I want to mention his Hitchcock and the Censors, which won the Edgar Award in 2020, and last night was named a McCavity winner. Congratulations, John.
Thank you.
Now, Anna Brazel, if I
Razzle.
Dazzle, I like Dazzle, writes historical crime fiction celebrating bodacious American heroines. Her debut mystery, Fanny Newcomb and the Irish Channel Ripper, won the IBPA 2018 Gold Award, a medal for historical fiction. Her short story heroines are featured in Kate Choplin Tossel's Writers and Miss Evelyn Nesbitt Presents. And the next one is Marty Wingate. And you're all in different places on my screen. But she writes the first edition library series for Berkeley, set in Bath and featuring Haley Burke, a curator of rare and collectible books from the Golden Age. She has never read, the character has never read a detective story in her life. The Bodies in the Library is out now. Book 2, Murder is a Must, will be released in October of 2020. She leads garden tours to Britain, spending free moments deep in research or in pubs. Roberta Rogow writes historical mysteries. She sometimes twists them, though, a little because she includes actual historical characters and she creates her own worlds. Her latest book is a private eye noirish tale set on a planet somewhere out there, settled by humans who brought all their human angst with them when they colonized space. When she isn't attending mysteries or science fiction conventions, she's a retired librarian from the children's area in New Jersey. Josh Pachter is an author, translator, editor. His short stories have appeared in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine and many other places since 1968. And his translations of stories by Dutch and Fleming authors have appeared regularly in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. He's the editor of The Misadventures of Nero Wolfe and the co-editor of The Misadventures of Ellery Queen and The Further Misadventures of Ellery Queen. This year, he became the first person to win the Short Mystery Fiction Society's Edward D. Hotch Memorial Golden Derringer for Lifetime Achievement and a competitive Derringer in the same year. Not bad for a guy who's so young. Let's move on, though. You've heard enough from me, but let's look at what the Golden Age is. You know, we know that the shelf life of most books is pretty brief. What is it, gang, about the Golden Age fiction that keeps us reading and having clubs about it, having panels about it, almost 100 years later? Anybody can answer that.
I'm putting my librarian hat on. I'm a three-headed monster, a writer, a librarian, and the singer, which doesn't count in this one. I think we just love the characters. You're going to get to that later, but I think it's the milieu, the characters, and the predictability. Just knowing what we're going to get.
How about the rest of you?
We'll get into that later, but that's one of the things I think is, you know, it's part of our background. It's starting to get into our head and our DNA, and we're familiar with it.
So you're saying a comfort factor. So
Very much a comfort factor.
I think comfort is part of it. We know what we're getting. It's a package, but I think the big thing is these characters are friends of ours. I love them because I love the character. I don't write Golden Age, so I'm here as a reader, and I love the characters, and I love the writing too. I find it very delicious. And since I'm a historian, I also love the historical aspect of it, knowing that it's accurate for the time.
I would add here in 2020 that we have to take the comfort factor a step further. Unlike the real world we're living in, when you're reading a Golden Age detective story, you know that at the final moments, everything is going to work out for the best. And to a certain extent, I think today that gives us some hope that maybe all of this might work out for the best as well.
I like it that Roberta and Anna both mentioned characters, because usually when you think of Golden Age of Mystery books, you think of the puzzle. That was the big thing, the puzzle, how to really work out this intricate plot where nobody will guess, but it's all there. But it's true. I think it's always the characters that we grow fond of. So it's very nice to be back with them.
I think you have to add in some way, the media coverage of the giants of the field. That is, books have a short shelf life, but I came at Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes to me is Basil Rathbone, and Miss Marple is Margaret Rutherford. And so I encountered them in movies before I went to the books. And I think that, yes, it's not a chicken egg problem. You had to start with the characters, but they've been immortalized in a way by the movies and the TV shows and the radio that have a much greater audience than the books themselves, I think.
I think you have a good point there. Now, let me follow up on it, though. You talk about the comfort, you talk about the predictability, but for the time when they were writing them, would you have thought they were predictable at that time? Or was it a matter of a puzzle versus the character? Or do we think of them as more predictable now?
I think what's made them predictable is the history involved. You know, we've read so many of them by now that we've learned the conventions, we've learned the tropes. And even if we can't figure out who done it ourselves, when the solution is revealed, there's less, I think, of a surprise to it today than there would have been at the time when no one had read anything quite like that before. In a sense, it's like the audiences in 1895 who watched the first Lumiere brothers films. They didn't really know what they were being exposed to because no one had ever seen anything like it before. Today, we have 100 years worth of experience with the Golden Age fiction that we can bring to the table.
How would you define those tropes a little bit better for our audience? Because not everybody is going to be as familiar with them as we are.
Well, let me let one of my co-panelists take a turn to take that one, okay?
I think the thing is that when they were being written, they were contemporary, and we tend to forget this. And there was an awful lot going on in the 20s and 30s that we now consider historical. And of course, we know 100 years on what happened because of what happened in the 20s and 30s. And a lot of the political and artistic ferment that was going on. I mentioned this in a note that I sent you. For instance, in one of her books, Agatha Christie has a side character who is a member of something that she calls the Imperial Shirts, who march and wave flags and are very anti-Semitic. And of course, this was, oh God, what were they called? The brown shirts.
Mussolini's.
Yeah. Well, there was a sort of a similar thing going on in England under not Walter Mosley, the other guy. But when it was happening, these things were contemporary. And we are now looking at them through a kind of a telescope, a kind of a lens. And we say, aha, this is what happened. But at the time, it was very revolutionary.
So when it's Oswald Mosley, we've been told. Anna, you're the historical buff on this. Do you feel some of that's the same too?
Well, I like to read them. I began reading them when I was just a student of history rather than a real historian. And I loved it for the history, for getting that insight of what was really going on, what real people were thinking. So for me, it's a real treat to go back and look at it and see what people think were happening versus what the historical record now thinks was happening.
Some of these series went on so long, talking about the history point, is that you can see how things, in some of the long running mystery series, you went all the way through the war, and the characters were dealing with rationing, and then it was after the war and they were dealing with piles of rubble all over London. And so they really are great to read just for that fact, just for the historical aspect.
John, how would you compare that with the movie versions that you became hooked on?
Well, there are certain kind of tropes. There's in the traditional English mysteries, the staid vicar, the bumbling constable, the gentleman investigator, and the movies, I think, have perpetuated that. They're sort of easy to satirize, and well, Raymond Chandler took them on to saying that, you know, that he and Dashiell Hammett were taking the mystery story out of the vicarage and into the mean streets. I guess, as I say, I go back to Basil Rathbone and Miss Marple as Margaret Rutherford, and those were takes that have sort of some version of that. I mean, if you come out with them later, you have Jeremy Brett and well, I guess Joan Hickson on public TV. So those are the images that I think work your way in your consciousness. I'm struck by the fact that these images reach a lot more people than the books themselves. I came on that idea when I was writing this Hitchcock book, and Hitchcock was arguing with David Selznick. Selznick, when they were making Rebecca, wanted to hew to the book exactly. The censors didn't want that, and Hitchcock thought, well, the images are more important. And Hitchcock, talking about it, in the 60s, made the point that, look, the movie has reached far more people than the book. By that time, Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca had sold maybe 3 million copies, so a lot. But the first time Rebecca came out, they reached twice that many people, and that's not even counting the re-releases, the DVDs, the TV. So I think the images of these heroes and heroines are very much what you see on TV or in the movies. Somehow you may have a different image in your mind depending on when you came on them, but I think that's the image that's imparted.
Debra, I want to back up just a step,
Sure.
if you don't mind. You asked to identify some of the tropes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was probably best done by Ronald Knox in 1929 when he wrote his 10 Commandments for the detective story, which are just marvelous. They start with the first one is the criminal must be mentioned in the early part of the story, but must not be anyone whose thoughts the reader has been allowed to know, which of course Agatha Christie worked around. Number 3 is not more than one secret room or passage is allowable. You can have one, but you can't have more than one. No
Can't have a whole castle of them.
No hitherto undiscovered poisons may be used. My own favorite is the 5th one. He wrote, no Chinaman must figure in the story. But I think these are the classic tropes, the 10 that Knox identified way back almost 100 years ago. And you can find them online. You just look up Ronald Knox's Decalogue.
But rules are made to be broken.
And Agatha Christie broke all of them.
Well, Dorothy L. Sayers said right off the bat, there should not be a romance in a mystery until Harriet Vane came along. Right. And then she changed her mind. So those, I think his list of rules are a bit tongue-in-cheek.
Well, I'm going to add one thing to that. In that detection group, club that I was telling you about, they almost, and this is a funny story, they almost kicked Agatha Christie out. I don't know if you know this, but they almost kicked her out because of the book, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. It was Dorothy Sayers who cast the vote that kept her in, but you know, at the time, but she'd broken the trope, she'd broken the rules. Marty, I'm going to come back to you because when I look at your first library, you know, your first edition library mysteries, I wondered if they were fan fiction or what is it? And, you know, now you're talking about breaking the rules. So where do you fit in here?
Well, I love that you came up with that term, Deborah, fan fiction. I wanted a way to look at this genre, and especially the women writers who are still so popular today, in a way that would be fun for people who knew the books really well, and yet not confuse people who haven't read them. And so that's how I came up with my character, the curator of the library, who's never read a mystery in her life. She studied 19th century literature at university, so she read Trollope. And so it allows me to play around. And I in the first book, The Bodies in the Library, obviously I had to start with Agatha Christie. And the first question people have when they read the book is, but there's only one body. I said, well, we're starting with Christie. That's one body. And then this is another body. So now it's plural. It was a fun way for the character, for Haley, to realize that there was more to it. There's more to the genre and more to the books than this sort of, than the puzzle. It's not just the puzzle. So she finds that out, as they do have. I had to get the fan fiction. Fan fiction is huge. And so there's a fan fiction group meeting at the library. She's opened this space up for them, and they are an Agatha Christie fan fiction group. Not the sanctioned kind, you know, there's all this, we don't really call it fan fiction, but the characters are living on through other writers now. Yeah, and so this is a real fan fiction group where one person, one of the writers is writing Miss Marple and zombies, and another is writing about Poirot with superpowers, and they're doing their own thing. So I feel like I can have as much fun as I want with this look at the golden age of mystery.
Or I'm going to go to Roberta on something to tie into that. We had a question in the chat that about the predictability, that the settings were the same, the characters were the same, the puzzles were the same. And anybody have to follow up on it after I ask Roberta. But Roberta, when I look at your writings, I see that they incorporate world building. Technically, that doesn't match what Josh was talking about here, about some of those tropes. So tell me, how does what you're writing fit in or contrast with the stylization of the Golden Age novel?
Well, what I'm currently writing is more in the Dashiell Hammett vein, but I'm using the same ideas in a different setting, which my friend Keith DeCandido has said, you can put a mystery plot, a standard Golden Age mystery plot, into almost any setting. I say almost, there may be one that it won't work in. But whether it is a reimagined colonial Manhattan, if the Spanish Moors got there before the Dutch did, or this city out on the edge of space somewhere, my basic theme is that people are people, and given the constraints of what is physically able to be done, you can still have a classic mystery in almost any setting. But now here's the but. You do have to, in my case, if you're going to have a strange place that is not something that a contemporary reader can automatically put themselves into, you're going to have to do a lot of description.
Well, then I'm going to ask two questions, one of Anna and one of Josh. Yeah. Anna, you write historical fiction, but if you could jump back in history. And if you could talk about this, you've heard what Roberta said. Are the Golden Age mysteries really relevant to today's crime fiction writers? And where would you go with it if you could turn around and look back?
Well, that kind of sounds like two questions. Yes, it's relevant because these are, I guess Knox actually called these commandments because he was a priest. So he said these are the way things have to be. But once you know the rules, then you can break them. So I find the rules are very, very useful. And I use them myself, even though like Roberta, since I write about the past, I write about New Orleans in 1889, and now I'm writing about San Francisco in 1919. My cities are characters, and you don't find that in the Golden Age. The village is kind of a character, but you don't get a lot of Golden Age stories that I've read that really have the city as a strong character. But the other question is that if I could go back and time travel and talk to someone working with the Golden Age, one of the writers or one of the characters, of course I would go see Harriet Vane, because she's always been my favorite character, and she's why I love the Lord Peter Wimsey novels. And what I'd really like to do is I'd like to read one of her novels. You know, because she talks about writing novels. We know she writes novels, but we've never, her fans like me have never been able to read her novels. I think that would be kind of fun. Unless maybe somebody has you know, some fan has written a Harriet Vane novel, but I don't think they have.
Any of you have a person you'd want to go back to meet personally?
I wouldn't mind meeting Ellery Queen. I don't want to get anywhere near Nero Wolfe, although Archie would be kind of fun. But the whole Queen Ménage on the Upper West Side, the early Ellery Queen was kind of a snob, and I did want to get into the class thing in the Golden Age things, because there were a lot of assumptions made when he said, when Knox said no Chinaman. This is one of the less fortuitous things about the Golden Age. They had an awful lot of assumptions based on class and race.
Let's get into that in a few moments, okay, Roberta?
Yeah.
But right now, I'd like to make sure, John and Marty, how about you guys? I want to stick to the same question before I want to hold Josh for a reason for the last one on this.
I wouldn't mind meeting Josephine Tay, who is a mystery unto herself.
Yes.
I find the Grant books really interesting. I was fascinated to read. I recently read The Singing Sands, where Grant goes to Scotland to recover from a nervous breakdown. You know, you don't often see that with these strong detective types. But there, and she is a mystery. There was very little written. I have read. It's too bad Nicola Upson, are you on this? If you're in the audience, speak up. I read that Nicola Upson wanted to write a biography of Josephine Tay. And so when she went to do research, she found nothing about her. She was a very private person. And so instead she turned her into the solver of mysteries in books. So she writes books about Josephine Tay. So I found that a fascinating turn on, all right, I don't know anything about you, I will make it up.
John, how do you tie into this?
Well, I would like to go back and meet Agatha Christie and find out what just what happened during that
Those few days.
He won't tell you. Won't tell you.
But Josh, I'm going to come to you last, as I said on that question, for a reason. You have edited collections of parodies and pastiches of Ellery Queen, Nero Wolfe. How does this question tie into the way you've been handling the Golden Age? Who you
it's always fascinated me that some of the characters that people like, for example, Rex Stout and Ellery Queen, Fred Dene and Manny Lee have written about have become so real that other authors have wanted to immerse themselves into those worlds. I mean, the classic example, obviously, is Sherlock Holmes. And in the 40s, Fred Dene, Manny Lee edited a collection of parodies and pastiches of the Sherlock Holmes stories that they called The Misadventures of Sherlock Holmes. But the Conan Doyle estate wound up having that collection withdrawn from circulation, although you can now find it online today. But Roberta says she would like to go back and meet Ellery Queen, the character. I was fortunate enough to get to know the authors, Fred and Manny. Fred much better than Manny, but Manny a little bit too. And around 70 or 71, I was having a conversation with Fred, and I suggested to him that he ought to do a Misadventures of Ellery Queen, kind of come full circle. And he liked the idea, but didn't think it would be appropriate for him to do it himself. So he suggested that I do it. And I got right on that. It only took me 44 years to put that book together. But it was great fun to steep myself into not just Ellery's world, but also the worlds created by people who wanted to either poke fun at or pay homage to Ellery Queen. And then I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to have lunch with Rebecca Stout Bradbury, Rex Stout's daughter. And it was just as the Ellery Queen parody and pastiche book was coming out, and I was telling her about it. She said, well, why don't you do one of those for Nero Wolfe? So that was also an enormous amount of fun, although for that one, I wound up getting a couple of authors to write brand new Wolfian parodies and pastiches. And just out this past week is The Further Adventures of Ellery Queen. Both Ellery books I co-edited with my friend Dale Andrews, who's also an Ellery Queen scholar. But it's fun to dig into other takes on those so familiar worlds.
Do all of you think the dialogue, or we know that we like the character, we've talked about the setting, where does the dialogue fit in? Because as you're talking about these worlds, because Josh, you folks had to stick to the dialogue and you had to stick to the, the tropes and such, even if you're going to turn them on their heads. How do you all feel about that? Josh, then Anna, and then Marty and John?
Well, I mean, if you're going to talk about dialogue, you have to start with Rex Stout. I mean, obviously your mileage may vary, but in my opinion, that is some of the best dialogue that's ever been written by anybody, in particular the interchanges between Wolfe and Archie. And that feel that Rex Stout had, not just for the characters, but also for the language itself. I mean, they are not two different characters created by one author. They are two living, breathing human beings who are very different from each other. And that's probably the biggest challenge for anybody who wants to pastiche or parody Stout is to capture that dialogue.
Anna, how do you feel? Because you've both been a reader and a hit writer.
Well, I'm going to talk about Lord Peter and Harriet Vane talking piffle, as someone mentioned in the chat room, because the conversations between those two protagonists is delicious, and it's yummy, and it's intelligent, and there are a lot of quotations, and I think that's what the readers really enjoy, is the intelligence of these two characters at the same time solving this problem, and the romance. So that dialogue I really love.
Do you think that the John, speaking of the dialogue and tying it to the media, how would you perceive this, both as a reader and as a media lover?
As a reader, I'm looking in a drawer here. I had at one point I did a panel on dialogue, and I came up with some absolutely terrible dialogue from the golden age of mysteries. Oh my God, it was the bat. Sir Henry was the bat. That kind of thing. And as the dialogue in the movies, I think it's pretty good. I think that my favorite Agatha Christie movies don't involve Poirot or Miss Marple. They would be a witness for the prosecution, and then there were none. And the dialogue in those is absolutely terrific, I think. So,
Marty, when you're doing it with the dialogue, how do you tie it all up there with yours?
It's the dialogue that drew me to Murder Must Advertise, which is my favorite Dorothy L. Sayers book. It wasn't her favorite, but it's my favorite. She dashed it off because she had a contract due, and I think she was working on the 9 Tailors at the time, and she needed more time to figure out those weird things. So I used Murder Must Advertise as the thread to pull through the second book, which is actually coming out December 1st, not October. Murder is a Must. And it was the book is so entertaining. I read 5 pages of a description of cricket, a cricket game. That's how good it is. She worked in an ad agency for several years in the late 20s. And so she drew on that because Murder Must Advertise is set in an ad agency. And she drew on all that snappy patter. This is the woman that came up with the ad phrase, Guinness is good for you, which is still used today. I mean, she was brilliant at dialogue. So that's what drew me to Murder Must Advertise and why I used it in the second book. So
Well, let me tie into something else which Roberta started to bring out. And all of you, I'd like your thoughts before we open up for questions. When we think about the Golden Age, we've talked about the comfort. We've talked about the historical feeling that makes us, gives us comfort. We've talked about the witticisms of the dialogue and how the puzzle or the whodunit challenges a reader to figure it out. But we also talked about the tropes. But there's renewed interest in it. It's fairly broad. It's 100 years later. It talked about social issues, or did it? I mean, where do we fall with the social issues? I'm going to start with Roberta on this, and I'd like your comments to tie it there, and what you think the public today is thinking when they see it.
Well, for one thing, there are certain social issues that they sort of slide over. The two big ones, of course, are race and class, and more race in the United States and more class in Britain, because especially the ones from the 1920s, by the mid-1930s, class distinctions, shall we say, were starting to blur. But especially the early ones, one thing that just glares at a modern reader is the, I have to use the word, anti-Semitism. A lot of the British authors, if there is a Jewish character, the person is usually depicted as very crass. If they aren't the actual villain, they are villainous. Even in Agatha Christie, toward the mid-1930s, there was a side character in one book. He's a very young man. He's involved with one of the women who is being accused, and he's very rich, and somebody yells, and Captain Hastings doesn't know why he doesn't like this guy. And then somebody says, oh, you're a slippery Shylock. And he realized, aha, he's Jewish. And that's why I don't like him. So there's that. And there are assumptions made about servants. In the American books, it's race. There's one book, I think it's called Too Many Cooks, where Nero Wolfe has to question the staff of a resort hotel, and most of them are Black. And he prefaces his remarks by saying, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't know how to approach you without insulting you. He knows there's a problem, he doesn't know how to deal with it. And again, it's the Chinaman thing. And these are the two things that they just wouldn't or couldn't or didn't deal with at the time, and they sort of jar with modern readers.
Oh, yeah.
I was just gonna say, Anna, why don't you go on from there?
Well, I reread A Natural Death this summer, and which I probably hadn't read for decades. And the use of the N-word was just, my heart just shriveled. And I just thought, I don't remember this from the first time I read it. And I just, I continued reading, and I thought, they can take this out. I was just kind of appalled by it, and I think it can make the modern reader drop out of the story, and you really have to reassess what was going on with this writer and why they would put that in, why the characters would say those types of words. So I agree. You know, it's kind of the class thing with the British stories. I think is actually, we kind of like it because, you know, I think a lot of
Downton Abbey syndrome.
yeah, a lot of us would like, well, yes, we want to be the upper class, so I want to continue reading this. So I don't think that's as blaring, but certainly the anti-Semitism and the use of the N-word is just critical.
Marty?
Classism in Christie is really so very obvious, and and appearance. So any good-looking woman, Hastings thought could not be a suspect at all. If she's good looking, forget it. And he was really a boob. I love Hastings. He's my favorite Poirot character in the Poirot series, but he was a boob. He didn't know what was going on. He never knew what was going on. He would blurt something out accidentally and Poirot would say, Hastings. But I think of I consider her a golden age of mystery writer. I think looking at Ngaio Marsh, you get a different view. Now, of course, she was from New Zealand, but she lived in England. Most of her stories are here. Inspector Allen books are set in England. And she has, I have found in the books I've read, a different view. And in fact, in one, Black as He's Painted, Allen is forced, he's talked into being sort of a bodyguard, sort of, for an African president who has come to London for some event, to his own embassy. And they're good friends. Alan and this character are good friends from Oxford. And so that's why he was chosen. And so she makes a fair point at showing the assumptions of people of the day, as opposed to Alan, who knows this guy. I recommend it highly.
John, when you take the comparison of what you've just been hearing, the social issues and the way these characters things, if you translate it towards film or something, do they do it the same way? I know Downton Abbey, more modern, has picked up the class, and there was another one a few years ago that is eluding me right now.
Oxford Park.
Upstairs, downstairs, or something. But what do you think? Do the costuming, does the speaking, does it modify itself, or do they clean it up comparatively to the Golden Age?
Well, I think they obviously clean it up. I mean, for some reason, I can't get Raymond Chandler out of my mind. He was blatantly racist.
Go ahead.
It's a little beyond the Golden Age, but in the movies they made of his books, that's all cleaned up. Agatha Christie, of course, used the N-word in one of her titles and didn't make it. It was when they made a movie, it was called "And Then There Were None." So I was thinking when I was listening to the previous discussion that the editors of the time must have been immune to this. That is, nobody edited for the N-word. Nobody, Chandler in particular, nobody said, well, this is blatant. What you're calling this dive is just racist, and it was. So I kind of wonder if I could understand how the authors themselves may have had those prejudices, the class prejudice, the race prejudice, but at some point it was more than just the authors. I mean, the publishers.
Everybody did.
Didn't go by.
Of the 100 people in the audience, I'm going to suggest that you start dropping in some questions because we're going to start the Q&A in a moment. But Josh, you've been an editor. I want to hear your viewpoint on both the historical side and today.
In terms of what we've been talking about, or are we
Yes,
changing?
I'm following up on John's comment.
Well, as a person who is alive in the year 2020, there's no excuse, as far as I'm concerned, for putting the N-word in the title of a book. And there's no excuse for the homophobia. There's no excuse for the anti-Semitism. But we're all reading these works with 2020 sensibilities. And that's not the sensibility with which the works were written. And at the time that these works were written, we looked at these issues, or I should say, I guess they looked at these issues very, very differently than we look at them today. You know, I would have a very hard time today watching a Woody Allen movie. But before we had contemporary understanding of his character and contemporary sensibility about those issues, I was a giant fan. You know, at the time these works were being written, I don't think that they were seen as classist or racist or sexist or homophobic. They were seen as being a relatively accurate depiction of the sensitivities and sensibilities of the era, which for a today reader doesn't excuse them at all, but I think it makes them maybe more understandable.
But you know, it also kind of gets back to, they reinforce the comfort aspect of it. This was the world back there, and these racists, that's the way it was. So people reading it felt more comfortable, and it made them feel their world is the way it should be.
Speaking of that, one of the questions now in the queue is that the average reader of that time was exposed to a smaller circle of people than, say, we are with our media and such. So that the person's arguing that the people were more ignorant and more inclined to believe stereotypes. Do you think the writers wrote to that? Or do you think the readers just accepted that because that's how they were? Marty or Roberta? Whichever one of you wants to answer first. Roberta?
I think, okay, which one of us?
Roberta, go ahead.
Okay, I think that these were contemporary writers writing about their world, using the words they would use. 100 years later, these are not the words or the attitudes that we use. You cannot beat somebody over the head with something that they didn't do. Some of the writers developed the sensitivity and the attitude. After Too Many Cooks, there was another book that Rex Stout wrote about 10 years later, in which one of the characters from Too Many Cooks, one of that staff, turns up 10 years later who has bettered himself. And the attitude then in the book has changed enormously because of what has happened in the 10, 15 years since the first book was written. So a lot of this reflects the author's view, society's view. And if you're going to read these now, you have to remember what society was. They were simply reflecting what was around them, their contemporary world. Presumably in 100 years, if God willing, any of our works survive, there may be a complete shift in society and we will be all read as relics. I don't know. I don't know how many of our books are going to survive. These were so well written and so grabbing that they have survived, and we're all the richer for it.
What do you think was the attitude, taking the historical role again, one of our questions is, what was the role of the British Empire on the attitudes of the British authors and the publishers of the time? Anna, would you have anything on that?
I'm not a British historian.
Oh, okay. Anybody else that want to take that one?
Well, I've written Sherlock Holmes Prestige, so I kind of immersed myself in that, and it was simply the God is an Englishman. We're on top, and we deserve to be because we are the best, period.
Then let me take this back in another vein, coming back to where we started. Do you think the renewed interest in Golden Ages mysteries is broad, or is it limited to more of the giants of the field? You've each kind of honed in on certain ones. So where do you think it goes? Renewed interest being broad or more of honed in ones as we've proceeded to read 100 years later?
I would say that it's pretty honed in on a small number of authors. You know, I think that Martin Edwards and the British Library are doing a wonderful job of renewing interest in some of the authors who have faded into an undeserved obscurity. But I mean, I teach film history at the community college level, and I would love to spend an entire semester teaching 50 different silent filmmakers, but it's all I can do to get the students to pay attention to 3. And I think there's a similar thing that's happened with these authors. Is there so much work was published in the day, and much of it was really quite good. But if you can get people to renew their interest in Sayers, in Tay, in Doyle, in Stout, in Queen, well, that's a start. And perhaps from there, they'll begin to explore those classic crime novels that the British Library is publishing, and that, by the way, Poison Pen Press in this country is reprinting for American audiences. I hope that happens. There's so much good work out there that's deserving of our attention. Of course, the problem is there's so much good work being written and published now that the well from which to draw has gotten so much deeper.
Well,
Well, I could-
Newton's law applies.
Let me let Anna answer here, okay?
I was just going to say, I'm going to start reading Georgette Heyer because I didn't know she wrote mysteries. I'd
They're
read.
fabulous. I love them.
Yeah,
I'm going to
excellent.
start reading them. Yeah, I knew that she did romances, which I read decades ago, but I just thought, hey, so she's on my list. And when someone's on my list, they go in Goodreads, they go on my website, you know, I share good authors. So I think that you pick up one and you share it and other people will start reading them.
What would you recommend as a whole panel as an entry into the golden age fiction to the modern mystery reader? Each of you tell me what you think 1 or 2 authors that, and it could be the same one, would and be an entry to the golden age fiction to a modern mystery reader. That's one of our panelists' questions.
Well, for somebody who's getting started, I would say that you cannot go wrong with the works of Rex Stout, because they're probably the closest in feel to what a contemporary writer is writing. Stout's work has just remained so contemporary, is I guess the best word. And then I would also, and I'm biased, of course, I suppose we all are, but I would also recommend later Ellery Queen. The earlier ones are tough slogging for people who aren't already interested in the golden age, but the later works, The Cat of Many Tales, 10 Days Wonder, these are books that I think a contemporary reader could find a convenient and satisfying and gratifying entry point into the world of GAD.
Marty, do you have one?
It's a tricky business with Agatha Christie and not so much Dorothy L. Sayers because the Lord Peter television shows were a few years ago, but the Christie people have a great PR machine, let me tell you. And they're getting these television shows and movies redone and churned out, some of them better than others. I don't actually see John Malkovich as Poirot, but okay. And so it seems like for that group of the golden age of mystery, Christie, Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, because there was a Campion series, through television and movies, you can get people to the book. And if you could get them past that line of just watching the television shows, their Inspector Allen shows, and get them into the books, I think that would be the best way. But take a look at the Agatha Christie website if you have not seen it. It's quite spiffy.
John, which way would you tell people to come into the other parts of the media too?
Well, I'm about one question behind. Just to answer that first question quickly, I would go to I would recommend a couple of movies. The Christie movies that I mentioned, Witness for the Prosecution, or And Then There Were None, the 1940s version. The question that I was behind on was the role of the British Empire. The British had a British Board of Film Censors, which when compared with the Americas, they were much more interested in class and the working man. They didn't want any films about strikes, for instance. So they banned oh God, now I'm blanking on the Eisenstein film. Well, I mean,
Battleship Potemkin.
Potemkin.
Temkin. They banned that through the 50s. And we would know more about what they banned, except that they were bombed by the British Board of Film Censors was bombed by the Luftwaffe in 1942. But we do know, because of the anecdotal information about the way they just were worried about class, and they were worried about foreign relations right up until the start of World War II. You couldn't have Nazi villains in British films. They had to be, if they were Germanic, they had to be some other race. Alfred Hitchcock actually had to make up a race, the Barovians, because rather than actually name a villain as a Nazi. So, and that was right up to World War II. That's just an aside, but the role of the British Empire had a big impact on what was coming on the British screens.
We're down to the last few minutes. So what I'd like to do is go around to our panelists and ask them what you're working on now. I think everybody has something that ties in. So Marty, let me start with you. Your book's coming out, and what else are you working on?
Well, book 3 in the series is with my editor at the moment. And in that book 3, I draw a thread from Daphne du Maurier, who is included in the first edition library in Bath, only because she was a favorite of the woman that created the library to begin with. So I get to use romantic suspense as well, yay. And it's a thread from Frenchman's Creek. So I have a pirate, I have a narrowboat instead of a pirate ship, and I've had great fun with it.
Anna, what are you working on?
I'm working on a vaudeville chanteuse who becomes an amateur sleuth in 1919 San Francisco. So my time period is Golden Age, and I do have a closed circle with the vaudevillians, but since I really celebrate San Francisco, it's not really Golden Age.
Josh?
As a writer, as I was putting together as an editor with Dale Andrews, The Misadventures of Ellery Queen, I just found myself really motivated to write a Queen pastiche of my own. So I took Ellery Queen's Puzzle Club. There were 5 stories in the late 60s, early 70s. And I wrote a Puzzle Club story that Janet Hutchings bought for Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine with the condition that I would never write any more of them, just the one. And I had never thought about writing more of them. One was enough for me, but when she told me I couldn't write any more, I wrote back and said, gosh, I was kind of thinking I would do 5 of them to match the 5 that Ellery Queen originally wrote. And so she got back to me and said, well, if you promise there will be only 5. So the 3rd one is in the new issue of Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, which comes out this week. The 4th one will be in the next issue, the January-February issue, and the 5th one, which I promise will be the last one, should be out sometime around the end of next year.
And how many years has it been that you've managed to be in Ellery Queen every single year now?
Well, I haven't been in every single year. I've been in every single decade.
Okay.
But I, to the best of my knowledge, I am the only person who has published in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine in 7 consecutive decades.
And considering he's only 60, that's pretty good.
If only.
John, Roberta, what are you working on?
Well, this is Law and Disorder is my noir-ish detective on that planet out there. So the second book, which is called Eyes of Lore, which actually has a character in it who might or might not be a Nero Wolfe pastiche. It's in that one. And I am now writing the 3rd. The editor has me in the queue for editing, and we're hoping to get Eyes of Lore out next spring. That's the best I can do.
That's great. John, where are you, considering that you're still celebrating your awards from this last few weeks?
Well, I'm back. I'm back writing mysteries. I have this mystery set in West Virginia, and one of the books I created something called a Museum of Fakes and Frauds. The book was called Stonewall Jackson's Elbow, and I'm back in West Virginia in that same museum with the question of, well, is this a fake or a real fake, or is it worth something or not? And this book is called Venus de Milo's Arms, and I'm not sure when it'll be out given the pandemic, but that's what I'm working on.
Well, good. And I'm going to give myself a plug. Three Treats Too Many came out a few weeks ago, and it's also in the Agatha Christie cozy type genre. And Four Cuts Too Many just went up for pre-order from Kensington. But I want to thank you all today for being with us. Is there anything else anybody needs to say before we close, before they cut us off here?
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Thanks
to
to
the 100
everyone
people
who showed up
joined us
to
today,
listen.
thank you for joining us very much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
letting us be Deborah for a few minutes.
I loved having you all, and I can't decide which one of you looked better as me. For those of you who came in late, every time anybody came up, their name appeared as me. So thank you all, and I'm going to end the meeting at this time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.